And let somebody shout a big amen. Amen.
Amen. Hallelujah. Amen.
Now I'm going to go through a few principles
Amen.
of the physical preparation. Thank you for those of you raise your hands. You may put them down now. Do you have a question? Does someone have a question or comment? Okay, if that's a legacy hand, please go ahead and lower your hands now. Praise God. All right, so I'm going to take the next couple of minutes to really just talk about just some plain basic preparation tips. Nikki, I see your hand still raised. Do you have a comment or question? Thank you. Thank you. Now, as we go through these are tips that anyone can apply to their own personal life. As I mentioned earlier on, different disasters have different impact. So we have, the wind, like hurricanes and storms and tornadoes, they come with strong winds. And the issue with the wind, the disasters that come with wind, they're actually very destructive because the wind, it destabilizes structures. And so when it's not just the rain and it's combined with the wind, it is more deadly because not only are we dealing with the water that really undermines the foundation, but the wind is shaking as well. And so we must be prepared. All right. There are also other dangers when we have the wind type disasters where the wind will pick up things and throw them like missiles. And so not only do we have the water type hazards, but we have hazards in terms of things that are being picked up and blown. And so it's a double danger. We also have disasters such as tsunamis. And I don't know if you understand what a tsunami is, right? I don't know if people understand what a tsunami is, but let me just give you a quick explanation of what a tsunami is. A tsunami is a serious and powerful wave that is accompanied usually by strong currents, right? The first wave may not be the largest or the most damaging. It can strike any ocean coast at any time, and it is a serious threat to life and property. Even the small tsunami can be dangerous, especially to people who are out in the water or to vessels that are in the water, and we cannot prevent them. So what is really a tsunami? Most tsunamis are caused by large earthquakes below or near the ocean floor, but they can also be caused by landslides or volcanic activity, right? Certain types of weather and near-Earth objects like asteroids or comets. So what happens is that the plate in the Earth, the actual crust of the Earth, it shifts abruptly, it's sudden, and that sudden movement causes an earthquake and displaces the water. So an earthquake is usually caused by the shift of the plates in the Earth. But with the tsunami, it's a very sudden. So it's like it's a fast action. It's rapid and it comes with a lot of power. And when it comes like that, just imagine you're having a bath. You have a bathtub and there is water in it. You haven't filled it up. It's about maybe halfway. And all of a sudden, something comes and shatters the bathtub or shakes it, gives it a massive punch. The water in the bathtub comes up like that and spills over, and it comes right over the edge, even though the bathtub was not full. And that is what happens with a tsunami. The waves are generated and move out in all directions across the ocean. And because of the force of the movement of the plate, the speed at which the water moves is what is the problem. So that speed, the force and the speed combined allows the water to propel at great pressure. And as the waves enter the shallow water, they compress. Their speed slows down and they build in height. So that's why the tsunami, so when the water from underneath comes up and it meets the water on top kind of slows it down. But what it does is to compress it and build momentum. So it goes up, and that's why you have this big wall of water. And so the wave height increases, the current intensifies, and that is why you have to move to higher ground in a tsunami. So different disasters pose different types of threats. But these are some things that we can do to prepare for most disasters. So I'm giving a more generic kind of explanation today, and maybe at some other time. In fact, I have a document that I will share, and Minister Lisa Ann can share that through the various platforms. I'll share a link to it somewhere that people can just download later on and get this information about the tsunami. Tsunamis, we have not experienced any of those in the Caribbean region, but they are very possible. Any issue with the tectonic plates, and we do have them. There's a big one that runs between Cuba and Jamaica. And at any point in time, that plate could move. It could move. And if that happens, then it means all the islands within Central Caribbean region would be at risk. In even those in the southwest, all the way down to as far as Trinidad and all the way to as far as Mexico. On either side, if that plate shifts, the pressure of the water could affect the entire Caribbean basin. So here are a few tips. It's important that we understand the risks. What are the hazards where you live and work? And the tips I'm giving you are more for you and your family or your local environment. And by the way, for those of you who don't know, I worked in disaster preparedness in Jamaica during my time as an environmental health officer. I was the coordinator for the disaster committee for St. Mary Health Department. And I also looked after emergency and disaster response for the Northeast region when I was a regional environmental health officer. So the hazards where you live, it's important that you know what they are. What is your area where you live prone to? Have you had flooding in the past? Whenever it rains and we have bad weather, do you normally have landslide in your area? What about your house? Whenever there is excess wind or rain, does your house usually flood? Do you have any issues? Does the water from behind your building run down? Do you have anything to catch the water? It's important that you identify the immediate risk, whatever hazards are there, and what risk those hazards could pose to you. So it's important that you find out. If you are working in a building, a high-rise building, if there's a major disaster, has there been any history of any issues with the building? Do you have an emergency exit? Are these places safe? Do you have fire and emergency drills to make sure that your fire route is working, that your fire and emergency systems are working? It's important that we are able to identify what these risks could be from the potential hazards in our environment. But in your community, one of the things that I used to do way back in the days when I was working in St. Mary was I used to work with the communities to set up community emergency plans. Do you have these in your community? And you're going to say to me, the health department is not doing it, but why don't you start one? Now that we know disasters are coming, can we start something? Can we actually go out, find out whether there has been an emergency committee before, and get things back up and running? Every environmental health officer, all public health inspectors in Jamaica are trained in disaster preparedness. Invite the one from your local health office to come and do a talk. Ask them to help you find resources. Help them to train up your team in your community. Ask them to help you train up your team in your community. Create a family disaster plan. So we are moving from the community now into our home. Our family needs a plan that tells everyone where to meet if you have to evacuate, who you've identified as an out-of-state family contact, how to get emergency information in your community, and how to take care of your pets. You need a plan so everybody knows what their responsibility is. When you prepare a plan, you need to also practice that plan. After you've sat down with your family and written your plan, you have to practice it. Otherwise, a plan on paper without practice is useless. You must have each family member meet at a designated spot outside of your house, like you would just in the same way that you would do if there was a fire, right? Or after an earthquake and the shaking has stopped. You need to know how to respond in the event of any disaster. So whether you're gonna stay inside, which in a storm you should stay inside. In an earthquake, it's probably best to be outside because of the high risk of the building itself collapsing on top of you. But it depends on where you are at and the severity as well. Because if there's an earthquake and there's a good solid table in your house, it's best to get under the table or stand under the door jamb. And when I was a child and they used to tell us these things, it didn't make sense to me. But now I understand. Because recently I was actually in the midst of a category like 7 point something earthquake. And I actually experienced the shock and fright of being in the middle of a major earthquake. And I was in a building and I had to evacuate. And I had to get on, and I was outside and there was a big mango tree over my head. And guess what I did? There was a big table. I ran straight under the table. Yeah, we had a good laugh afterwards because it was really funny to see me crawling on that table and ducking for cover. But that's what I was trained to do in an earthquake. Because if that building came down or if that mango tree came down on top of that building, then you know what would have happened. So it's important that we know the evacuation routes. You need to know whether you need to stay indoors or whether you need to help the neighbors or leave the community completely because of the other hazards that you have identified before. If there's a river in your community and you know from history that this river will overflow its bank even if heavy rain is coming from the next parish or the next area, and this place always gets flooded, don't wait for the river to overflow its bank before you go. And don't wait and say that JBF is coming to save me and you're going to be Superman. It's important to leave before. When I was working in emergency, I've had a lot of real life frontline emergency in natural disasters as well as the infectious diseases. I remember years ago in Hurricane Dean, I was in the emergency operations center at the parish council. And the mayor gave the order for the community to be evacuated in Port Maria. And we evacuated most of the communities. And because it was a Category 5 hurricane, we wanted to evacuate everybody from that who lived on the beach and all those little. And there was a small area. This elderly couple decided that they were not going to leave. And so at the time when we closed off and we said all evacuations must end at this time for the safety of our emergency personnel, you know what? In the middle of the night when the sea in Port Maria began to regurgitate and behave like it really looked like a tsunami, I'm telling you, I saw the waves. I'd never seen this before. The waves were like 15, 16 feet in the air. And the people were crying and calling for us. And we said, I'm sorry, we can't come. We will not put our team in danger to come and save you when we already gave you the opportunity. And we didn't go back. Because if we did that, then we would have been putting the staff at risk because their cars could be swept away. And we've already, So it's important that we understand. Now, so we are evacuating, but where exactly are we going? So we need to identify the meeting places. We must determine this beforehand. You can't say we're going to meet at Sovereign Center when we can't go to Sovereign Center, or we can't go to downtown Kingston. Like, where exactly are we going to meet? Identify a spot so that we can meet each other there. Make sure that everybody who is part of your plan know exactly where these locations are. Because sometimes in emergencies, people get, we separate from each other. Whether it's in a shelter, there might not be enough room in one place, and you might need to be sheltered somewhere else, or the disaster itself separates you, right? You are trying to leave your house and part of the house break and one part gone in the river. Somebody is in the part gone in the river, and somebody is rescuing the other part. When the people come to rescue those who are left on that side, you might not end up in the same place. But if you know, and your children needs to know, how to contact you or where you is your meeting place. Because sometimes even the communication lines go down. We've seen it. The mobile phone towers didn't work in those in hurricane in the disasters. They all went down. All the satellites were jammed for a couple hours, and we had to get back to our good old radio, VHF, right? So it's important that we communicate before the disasters. Now, make a list of out-of-area emergency contacts. That is, if you're in St. Mary, you're in St. Thomas, or you're in Kingston, and you have family members outside of these areas, or somebody from your family is working in another area. You work in Spanish Town, but your house is in New Haven. You work in Red Hills, you live in Red Hills, but you work in downtown Kingston. It's important that we know where our family members are, so that we are, and we also need to include like a trusted friend in some of these contacts as well. Someone who is out of your physical environment, where you can, you can contact them so they can send help for you. If everybody is in the same place on the same street as you, when the river come and block everybody in, you're all there. Next thing is to identify the evacuation route. So yes, we know where we are going. We've set up a plan. We practice it. We know where the meeting places are, and we know who to contact if we get in trouble. But if we need to evacuate and we have time, which route will you take? Is it flat bridge you're planning to drive? Because flat bridge cannot be your escape route in a flood. Because 99.9% of the time is that flat bridge itself is a hazard and a disaster itself. So we have to map out the quickest exit from the house, from the neighborhood, from the community, but you also need to factor in the dangers along that route. Yes, just because flat bridge is the shortest way to get to Linstead from Spanish Town does not mean that that's the route you will take. Because in a flood type emergency, flat bridge is definitely not going to be your safest route at all. And as we are preparing to travel in our cars, then it means that we need to have a disaster supply kit for the car and one for the house. So if you're stranded in the house, you need to have your emergency supplies. Make sure there's enough supplies at home. And you can keep a little stash at work too. I used to do that back in the days. I always had an emergency kit in my car when I was in Jamaica as well. I always had a machete, a pair of water boots, and a little bag, and an extra bottle of water stashed away. And I always had a little pack. I always had an emergency supply of crackers in my car. Keep a little disaster kit, a spare flashlight with spare batteries, and don't keep the batteries in the flashlight. Keep them outside in a little pouch, but keep a little emergency supply. This simple, basic supply like that could make a huge difference. and keep a rope in your car, a piece of rope. I know there are lots of issues around keeping rope and so on. Roll it up nice and put it under the place where you have your wheel. Because in an emergency, that piece of rope can make a huge difference. But it's also important that we prepare the children, that the children are aware of what's happening. It's not just the adults who are practicing this disaster plan, but that the kids understand what the risks are and what your family is planning to do if a disaster strikes. You can also give the children responsibility. Because when children have responsibility, it's easier for them to remember what to do. If they remember, my job is to grab the first aid kit, or my job is to press the alarm, or my job is to call auntie so-and-so, give them some responsibility. And don't forget the people with the special needs, the physically disabled people, people with disabilities often need a little extra support. And it's kind of funny enough, I was going in the elevator the other day at the train station, and someone held the door open, and there was this conversation that started around how they are coming up with new policies now that says we should hold the door open for like a person in a wheelchair or a blind person or so on. And I said, God forbid that it should come a day in my life when we have become so politically correct that you can't even hold the lift door open for somebody anymore because it's considered offensive. That's like, how offensive could that be? It's common courtesy, and not just for somebody because I didn't have a disability and the person held the door open for me, and somebody was saying, oh, nowadays they're telling you not to hold the door open. But in an emergency, people with disabilities, especially those who are physically challenged, because of the excess noises and the sounds and so on, it can become quite disorienting for them. For a person who is blind, in a disability, in an environment like that, it can be really challenging. So don't forget those with special needs. And just a few more tips. In terms of their supplies, stock up on extra medication. But I want to give a word of caution here. The extra medication that you're stocking up on is not just every medicine in the book. If you are someone who relies on prescription medicine, you need to speak to your doctor about securing an emergency stockpile. Always try to have an additional month's worth of medicine on hand in case of any disruptions to your health service. It's not just you're going to go to the pharmacy and buy everything you can think of. It's particularly important for those who rely on prescription medication. If you use oxygen, if you need these things, if you need a CPAP machine or something, make sure you have extra battery-powered supplies so you can, if you are sleep apnea or something like that. You can stock up on emergency, like first aid medication, like pain, paracetamol and that kind of, ibuprofen type medication. You have an emergency supply of that. Bandages, you have your first aid kit to deal with bruises and scratches. You need triangle bandages, scissors to cut cloth if you need to make an emergency bandage, and also make provisions. Make special provisions, right? Plan ahead. Keep extra bottles of water. I used to have extra bottles of water. And then and there's another key thing I want to share with you. Whatever emergency supplies you have, don't just stack them up there. You must always check on them because these things do have an expiration date. So if something should happen outside of a disaster, You use the one in your emergency kit and you replace it with the fresh one that you bought. That's for medicines and things that expire. So like things like gloves and medication and some of those things that are in bottles, you know, mosquito repellents, alcohol swabs, and so on. You buy the fresh one, replenish your first aid kit with that one, and use the one from your first aid kit so that it doesn't expire. I hope that's making sense. And as I wrap this up, you know, make special provisions. Do a mental walkthrough and consider any extra difficulties that you might run into. If you're living overseas or you're working, I know a lot of people work in these group homes and they care for people with mental health or people who are living with disability, people who are challenged with disabilities. Do a mental walkthrough, you know, think about it in advance. If you're working with seniors or people who are non-English speakers who can't read some of the signs, people living with disabilities, be a bit intuitive and think ahead of what might happen, what could happen, so that you can prepare in advance. Check your smoke detectors, your carbon monoxide detectors. Make sure your alarms are being maintained and that, you know where you can shut off stuff like the electricity power, or, your gas shut off, your water shut off, your electrical main board. Know where these things are and not waiting into the middle of the electric in a crisis like, oh, where's the power supply in my house? I don't know. Because these things could cause additional harm or make an emergency situation worse or put you in danger. Find a safe place in your house where you can take cover and brace yourself. Right? And this applies not just in earthquake, but in wind disasters. In wind type disasters, always make sure you have a window open on the leeward side so that the air doesn't get trapped in the building. If you've ever lived with me or you've ever been with me in a disaster, people always ask me, why do you open the window? It's because I need this, so you don't trap all the pressure inside the building. So the direction that is away from where the wind is blowing, you keep a window open on that side of your house so that it releases the pressure from inside of the building so that your interior walls do not implode. And eliminate hazards from around your house. Zinc and old pan, old furniture, old this, even old cars. For those of us who live in areas that have had tornadoes, maybe Jamaica, you haven't seen one. But if you've ever seen this on the TV, the tornadoes will pick up an entire building, a house. I've seen a cow. I've seen a car, a truck. It was like a matches box in a tornado. If you have all things hanging around, yeah, especially if you've had an alert and a warning that something is, if you can't get rid of them, tie them down. Tie them down, staple them down, put big stone on them, do something to prevent them from becoming missiles. Because I've seen missiles like that also I saw, I think a few years ago, we had a tornado in one of our states. And let me tell you, the storm picked up one of those big metal beams, and it was, my God, it went through somebody's house. Thanks be to God, nobody was in there. It was like a giant, what you call javelin. And the thing weighed about a ton. And the wind picked that thing up and sent it through somebody's house like a javelin. Yeah. And as we bring this to a close, learn CPR and first aid. Get trained in basic first aid, basic life support. Your training could save your life, your family member's life, a neighbor's life, or you could become a real helping hand. And speaking of helping hand, join one of the local community teams. Get involved in the local, Red Cross. Join the local emergency response teams. And as I mentioned when we started, get involved with the local community group so that you can also learn some of these principles, and you can become a blessing to your community. I do hope this has been helpful. I have 5 minutes to take a few questions, but I will stop at the end of the 5 minutes because I need to go. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fletcher. Dr. Fletcher, one thing though, liquefaction. I know in the prophecies we're being told about liquefaction of land, like in Portmore and so forth. How do you deal with that? Is there anything we can do? Liquefaction of land in terms of, I saw a big crater and the houses were just falling in because of an earthquake. So it's like the soil just liquid went to crumble, and the houses just crumbled with it into this crater. What can we do to help the people specifically in Jamaica based on the points that God has given to say downtown will be flooded, in particular West Kingston area and the whole Marcus Garvey to Seaview, and Portmore. The cry was also for Portmore, where land would be taken away and liquefaction of the land in Greater Portmore because it was dumped up. We don't focus on things.
Okay. So a bit of a background. So 2 things. One is these coastal areas that are very close to the sea, there's a natural issue at play here. One of them is because of the elevation of the land. For like downtown Kingston is at sea level. It means that the watermark, the level where the natural level of the water in the earth is at this almost exactly the same level as the land. I think most of downtown Kingston would be just about like 3 feet above sea level. That means if you dig a hole 3 feet, you'll get water. That's pretty much what I'm saying, right? So the place it's sitting on top of water. Places like Portmore is dump up land, or it was in a swamp. It means that those areas they already have a high water table. So the natural geological feature of the place is that it's sitting on top of water already. That's number one. If something like a storm or storm surge arises, which a storm surge is where the sea itself, because of geological and sometimes meteorological changes, the water rises up. It can also, it's affected by things like the moon and the position of the moon to the earth, right? And the polar pull of the moon and the earth. It causes the tide to come up, right? So what happens is this. So number one, remember we are starting from a place where we already have a high water table, right? So follow me. We have a high water table. Number two, some of the communities, it's reclaimed land, which means that they have dumped it with soil. So they have put dirt there to increase the depth of the soil so that you can build houses on it. So it was not naturally a firm foundation in the first place. So technically speaking, they've put dirt on sand. Go back to the scripture. They've put dirt on sand and build houses there. In the case of an earthquake, the crust of the earth is what shifts. Remember what I said about the tsunami? The earthquake is it's like a powerful force. So when you have that massive shaking that occurs in the crust of the earth, it doesn't matter how much dump up, it will shake it because the foundation has been shaken. And if there's sand under there, the sand is just very loose, granular, slippery. It's not going to stand.
So I saw marl. It was just like a marl packed together underneath the earth. Mm-hmm.
But let me finish this. Right? So even if it was in the middle of Blue Mountain, you have an earthquake. If it's strong enough, it could damage that solid mass of land. Much less for something that it's at sea level. It doesn't have a lot of compact soil underneath it. So most of that area is what we call sandy loam. It means that if you dig dirt anywhere in the Kingston area, what you will find is a sandy type of dirt. It's sand and soil mixed. It's very sandy. It's sandy loam. It means those types of soil is not very compact. And so any kind of invasion by excessive amount of water will undermine that soil. Number two, if you have a swampy area, which means that the water is already waterlogged, there's a lot of water, the place is already saturated with water. If there's an earthquake, which would apply to somewhere like Portmore or downtown Kingston, if there's any kind of additional introduction of water on top of an area that already has a lot of water, if you have a sponge that is already full of water and you add more water to it, what happens? What happens?
It still suck it up. It suck up more water unless
Really?
it's saturated. Unless it is.
It has a limit. Sponges are not limitless. They are not limitless. There's when it reaches saturation point, then the water that is inside of it will come out. You go home and do it with the sponge in your kitchen. Put your sponge in a bowl full of water and see how much of that water. It will suck up some of it, but there will be water on top of that sponge because it has a capacity. So when it has reached capacity, if there's excessive water under it, what is going to happen is that there's nowhere else for the water to go. But this is not just a bowl of water. There's a water under pressure, which means that if the water is under pressure, it's going to alter not the chemical, but it's no longer compact. It's like if you make dumpling, okay. You make a dough with flour. You use flour and make a dough, and you have a nice dough. You're going to fry some nice dumpling. But if you begin to pour water, you get a jug, right, that has a nozzle, a big forceful nozzle, or you get a pipe and you turn that pipe on at full blast and you heat that dough. You know what's going to happen? It's going to tear it apart. So that is what an earthquake does. The pressure and the force of the tectonic plates coming together and the impact on the soil and the earth, it sucks out. It creates a vacuum type movement and it sucks it out. So that's why you get these caverns and you'll see these black holes just open up and the entire houses disappear. Because the earthquake because of that vacuum type pressure that is created by the movement of the plates, there's a hole in there and it sucks in the pressure and it pulls everything out from that is on top of it. So if you see that, it is actually very natural. It's happened over and over again. You can go on YouTube and look for the videos. I think in the Bahamas a couple years ago, maybe 2020, I think when I was in Trinidad in the pandemic, they had one of those situations. And it was just like, the place was just sucking in these houses. The houses were just imploding. It was just going into this hole and just disappearing. That's not something somebody's made up. It's real. So that mushy looking like thing, it's the force of the pressure from the crust of the earth. It creates what you call like a vacuum and it sucks. The pressure is so powerful that it just sucks the earth in and everything comes like mush. Like when you use a blender, like a NutriBullet, it just sucks it in like that. All right? So that's what happens with that. So you say, what can we do? What can we do? What can we do? We can, if you are living in these areas and you have the opportunity, and I know this will be a very minority of people would be able to move. The reality of the situation is the place is what it is. There's nothing you can do, right? The foundation is already not great. If you can't move, get insurance. Insure your property. Because if disaster strikes, the likelihood of your property being damaged is actually quite high. The third thing you can do is to make sure you evacuate. Follow the warnings. Evacuate. Develop your plan. Prepare yourself and your family for what to do in the event of an tsunami or earthquake or something like that, right? But I think the last thing I will say is don't panic. There's no need to panic. Use your energy to prepare and pray. You can ask God for direction on what's the best course of action to take, right? But I don't believe we need to panic. What we need to do is prepare and be ready. All right. So thank you for having me. I do have to stop here because I have another urgent matter to attend to. Thank you so much for coming. And thanks for having me.
Thanks for sharing.
Thank you so much, Minister. Everybody, can you just give her a round of applause for me? Can you just give her a round of applause? What an insightful presentation. What an insightful presentation. Man, this thing had me thinking. I wasn't even considering to have one of the children run with the first aid kit. We can't take on everything ourselves, right? So sometimes some simple little things, can help us to make our journey in a situation easier. I want to thank Dr. Larchie so much. Today is Monday, by the way, in Australia, so it's Monday morning and she has to go. Thank you so much. I appreciate what you have done for us in supporting us and Jamaica, because this is not just benefiting the ministry alone. This is here to support Jamaica, to prepare for what God is saying is coming. God is God. He can stop. He can do whatever he pleases. But as Dr. Larty said, Fletcher Larty said, we need to prepare, not panic. We need to pray, right? That's what we need to do. Pray and prepare. And this is what we're doing right now in having this disaster preparedness awareness session in the Holistic Healing Ministries evangelistic crusade on September 15, 2024. Have a wonderful day, Dr. Larty, and thank you so much. It's a pleasure having you. Let us use this opportunity to welcome everybody who is here. And if it is that you'd like to get the presentation, just email me or send me a WhatsApp or say something in the chat and we can make a note. This Zoom presentation is also streaming on YouTube, so you can also share it with your friends. Go to Holistic Healing Ministries Jamaica on YouTube and you can share it with your friends. It's also on my Facebook page. I'm just sharing the link on our page as well. You have a responsibility, not just for your family, but for your community, to help this Jamaica land we love. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Minister Shirley, are you here? Would you be able to grace us with another song before we go into our second segment and just do our closing off? We need to hear what the Lord is saying. Thank you so much.
You hearing me?
Yes, I can hear you.
This is my desire, to honor you, and Lord, with all of my heart, I worship you. All I have within me, Lord, I give you praise, and all that I adore, I adore is in you. This is my desire to honor you. And Lord, with all of my heart, I worship you. All I have within me, Lord, I give you praise. All that I adore is in you. Oh, Lord, I give you my heart. I give you my soul. I live for you alone. Every breath that I take, every moment I'm awake, Lord, have your way in me. Lord, I give you my heart. I give you my soul. I live for you alone. Every breath that I take, every moment I'm away, Lord, have your way in me. Every